The crystal glasses chimed with false cheer. I'm Harper. I'm 27, and I was the black sheep of Beacon Hill. I'd come home to prove I wasn't a failure, but across a table loaded with silver, my sister made it clear they saw my son as my biggest mistake yet. Let's just hope he doesn't ruin your life too, she said. They thought they had me broken, cornered in their perfect world. What they didn't know was that the doorbell was about to ring, and the man they despised was standing on the other side, holding the secret that would burn it all down. Before I tell you exactly what was in that folder, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever felt like the black sheep of your family, if you've ever had to fight to be seen for who you really are, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this family reunion ends. I stood on the marble steps of the Thompson family brownstone, the kind of house that screamed old money and older grudges. Nolan, my 4-month-old son, slept in my arms, his tiny chest rising and falling against my heartbeat. The diaper bag dug into my shoulder, but it was nothing compared to the weight of this place. Beacon Hill, Boston, where every cobblestone and gas lamp whispered tradition, and every glance from my family carried the sting of judgment. The air smelled of polished wood and lemon cleaner, sharp enough to cut through the fog of my nerves. 8 months ago, I'd left this house, my belly just starting to show, my family's whispers trailing me like shadows. I was the artistic one, their polite way of saying failure, the black sheep who dared to dream beyond their suffocating expectations. My sister Victoria was the golden child, married to Andrew Prescott, a smug investment banker with 2 perfect kids and a life that sparkled like the crystal in their dining room. Me, I was the one who'd chosen love over legacy, Caleb over their approval. Today, though, I had a plan, a secret tucked in my heart like a hidden ace. I was here to make them see me, see us, as more than a disappointment. Nolan stirred, his tiny fist curling against my chest, and I felt a surge of defiance. I could do this. I would do this. My finger hovered over the ornate doorbell, its brass gleaming like a challenge. I pressed it, the chime echoing like a warning shot. The door swung open and there was my father, Richard, his tailored suit as stiff as his posture. His eyes softened for a split second and he called me Claire Bear, a nickname I hadn't heard in years. My heart leapt, maybe this time would be different. But then his gaze dropped to Nolan and something flickered in his eyes. Not warmth, not pride, something heavier like regret. Harper, he said, stepping aside. Come in. I crossed the threshold, the familiar scent of the house hitting me like a wave. My mother, Margaret, appeared in the foyer, her smile sharp and thin like a blade wrapped in silk. You made it, she said, her voice cool as the marble floor. Victoria glided in next, her designer dress hugging her like it was custom-made for a queen. Harper, darling, she said, her hug as stiff as a mannequin's. You look tired. Her eyes flicked over my post-pregnancy frame, lingering just long enough to sting. Her kids, Taylor and Delia, trailed behind her, polished and perfect, like little trophies of her success. I forced a smile, clutching Nolan tighter. It's good to see you too, Vic. They led me to my old bedroom, and my stomach dropped. The walls, once covered with my sketches and posters, were bare, replaced by sleek gym equipment. A flimsy travel cot sat in the corner, a grudging nod to Nolan's existence. My life here had been erased, sanded down to nothing. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was a guest, a stranger. I set Nolan in the cot, my hands shaking. The weight of their rejection pressed against my ribs, but I swallowed it down. I had my secret. I had Caleb. I had Nolan. This wasn't over yet. Dinner was a battlefield disguised as a family meal. The dining room gleamed with silver candlesticks and crystal glasses, each one catching the light like a warning. I sat across from Victoria, her smile as polished as the table. Nolan was upstairs, asleep in that flimsy cot, and I felt his absence like a missing limb. My mother raised her wineglass, her eyes glinting. To family, she said, her voice smooth as poison. And to new beginnings. I nodded, my throat tight. The food, roast lamb, herbed potatoes, asparagus drizzled with something expensive, tasted like ash. Every bite was a reminder of the life I'd never fit into. So Harper, Victoria said, cutting her meat with surgical precision. How's freelancing? Still chasing those creative dreams? Her tone was sweet, but her words were knives. I gripped my fork. It's going well. I've got steady clients now. Steady enough to support all this? Andrew, her husband, gestured vaguely toward me, his smirk dripping with condescension. I forced a laugh. We're managing. My father cleared his throat, his eyes on his plate. And Caleb? Still working at that garage? He's a mechanic, I said, my voice sharper than I meant. A good one. Margaret's lips pursed, just enough to notice. It's just such a different path, Harper. We always thought you'd choose something more stable. The air grew heavier, each word a stone piling on my chest. They pivoted to my past, dragging up every misstep, the semester I'd flunked after a breakup, the years I'd spent finding myself instead of following their script. Then came the real attack. Caleb. He's got quite the reputation, doesn't he? Victoria said, her voice light but her eyes cold. That incident, what was it? A hit and run? So tragic. My blood ran cold. I knew the story they'd heard, the one they'd spread. Caleb, the kid from the wrong side of town, tangled up in something shady. They didn't know the truth. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't care. Andrew leaned back, his smile smug. Some people just don't have the same advantages, do they? I opened my mouth to fire back, but Victoria struck first. She looked at Nolan's empty high chair, her voice loud enough to echo. He's such a lovely baby, Harper. Let's just hope he isn't a mistake that ruins your life, too. The room went silent. My fork clattered against my plate. Every eye was on me, waiting for me to break. My mother's face was a mask, my father's gaze fixed on his wine. Victoria's words hung in the air, sharp and final, declaring my son, an extension of my failure. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. Excuse me, I managed, my voice trembling. I fled to the hallway, my vision blurring with tears. The weight of their judgment crashed over me, and for a moment, I believed it. I'd failed Nolan. I'd brought him into a world that already hated him. I stood in the dim hallway, my back against the wall, trying to breathe through the panic. The portraits on the walls, generations of Thompsons, all stern and perfect, stared down at me, their eyes accusing. I'd come here to prove something, to show them I was more than their disappointment. But all I'd done was walk into their trap. The doorbell rang, sharp and jarring, cutting through the haze. I froze. No one visited the Thompsons unannounced. Not in Beacon Hill. Footsteps echoed behind me, Victoria, her heels clicking like a metronome. Who could that be? She muttered, brushing past me to the door. I followed, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't name. She opened the door, and there he was. Caleb. My Caleb, standing tall in a suit I'd never seen him wear, his jaw tight, his eyes blazing. In one hand he held a bouquet of wildflowers, my favorite, bright and unpretentious. In the other a manila folder, its edges worn but purposeful. Harper, he said, his voice steady, cutting through the fog of my shame. He stepped inside, ignoring Victoria's stunned expression. His eyes found mine, and for the first time that night, I felt seen. Caleb, I whispered, my voice cracking. What are you doing here? He didn't answer, not yet. He walked past Victoria, past my parents who'd appeared in the foyer, their faces a mix of confusion and disdain. He stopped at the dining room threshold where Andrew still sat, his smirk faltering. Good evening, Caleb said, his voice calm but edged with something dangerous. I'm sorry to interrupt. He set the flowers on the table, the bright petals stark against the sterile perfection. Then he opened the folder, his movements deliberate. But I think it's time we talked about the truth. My father's eyes narrowed. What is this? Caleb didn't flinch. This family cares about reputation, right? Appearances? Let's see how that holds up. He slid a document across the table, a faded police report, its edges yellowed but the words clear. My heart stopped. I knew that report. The hit and run, 8 years ago. The one they'd pinned on Caleb, the one that had followed him like a shadow. But then I saw the name listed as the driver. Not Caleb, Andrew Prescott. The room tilted. Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Andrew's face went white, his glass slipping from his fingers. My mother stared at my father, whose silence was louder than any confession. There's more, Caleb said, his voice steady as he pulled out another document, an affidavit, notarized, from another witness. Someone my father had paid to stay quiet, to let Caleb take the fall, to protect Andrew, to protect Victoria, to keep their perfect world intact. I looked at my father, my voice barely a whisper. You knew? His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. That was enough. The room erupted, Victoria's voice shrill, Andrew stammering excuses, my mother's silence deafening. But Caleb's hand found mine, warm and steady, and for the first time that night, I didn't feel alone. The dining room felt like a courtroom, the air thick with shock and betrayal. Caleb stood beside me, his hand still gripping mine, grounding me as the world unraveled. The police report and affidavit lay on the table, undeniable proof of the lie my family had built. Andrew's face was a mask of panic, his eyes darting between the documents and my father. Victoria's perfect composure had shattered, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. "You can't just barge in here with this nonsense," she snapped, her voice high and brittle. "This is our home, Caleb. You have no right." "No right?" Caleb cut her off, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through her words. "You've spent years letting everyone believe I was the criminal, that I was the one who ran and left someone hurt, but it was him." He pointed at Andrew, who flinched like he'd been struck. "And you all knew." My father finally spoke, his voice cold and measured. "This is hardly the time or place, young man. You're making a scene?" "A scene?" I said, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't known I carried. "You let me believe Caleb was a liar. You let everyone believe it. For what? To protect him?" I gestured at Andrew, whose head was bowed, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Margaret's lips parted, but no words came. Her silence was a confession, and it cut deeper than any of Victoria's barbs. I looked at her, my mother, the woman who'd taught me to tie my shoes and braid my hair, and saw a stranger. Caleb squeezed my hand, his voice softening. "Harper, you don't have to do this alone anymore." Victoria's eyes flashed, her venom turning on me. "You did this, Harper. You brought him here to ruin us. You've always been jealous, always wanted to tear me down." Her voice cracked, revealing something raw. Jealousy, yes, but also fear. Fear that her perfect life was crumbling. I stared at her, my sister, the one I'd once idolized. "I didn't come here to ruin you, Vic," I said quietly. "I came here to be seen, to be heard, but you couldn't even give me that." The room fell silent again, the weight of truth settling like dust. Andrew muttered something about misunderstandings, but no one listened. My father's face was a stone wall, unreadable but heavy with guilt. Caleb's arm slid around my shoulders, protective, steady. "Let's go, Harper," he said, his voice a lifeline. "We don't need this." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. As we turned to leave, Victoria's voice rang out, desperate and sharp. "You think you've won? You're still nothing without us. You'll always be nothing." Her words stung, but they didn't break me. Not this time. I didn't look back. The night air hit my face as we stepped outside, cold and sharp like a slap that woke me up. Nolan was still asleep in his car seat, tucked under Caleb's arm. The brownstone loomed behind us, its windows glowing with a warmth that had never reached me. I felt lighter with every step, like I was shedding years of shame. Caleb set Nolan's car seat in the back of his old pickup, the one he'd fixed up himself. He turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "You okay?" I nodded, though my hands were still shaking. I didn't expect any of that. He pulled me into his arms, his warmth cutting through the chill. "You were incredible in there," he murmured. "You stood your ground. I'm proud of you." I buried my face in his chest, the tears I'd held back finally spilling over. Not just from tonight, but from years of feeling small, unwanted, wrong. "I thought I could make them see me," I whispered. "I thought I could make them love Nolan." "They don't deserve you," he said fiercely. "Or him. You're enough, Harper. More than enough." We drove through the quiet streets of Boston, the city lights blurring past. I thought of Victoria's last words, "You'll always be nothing," and felt a flicker of doubt. But then I looked at Nolan, his tiny face peaceful in sleep, and Caleb, his hands steady on the wheel, and I knew she was wrong. Back at our motel room, a cheap place on the edge of the city, nothing like the grandeur of Beacon Hill, I tucked Nolan into his crib. Caleb sat beside me, his hand resting on my knee. "What now?" he asked. I took a deep breath, the weight of the night still heavy but shifting. "We go home," I said, "to our life, our family." He smiled, a small, tired smile that held a world of promises. "Sounds good to me." As I lay in bed that night, Nolan's soft breaths filling the room, I felt something new, a spark of freedom. My family's judgment had been a chain, but tonight, I'd started to break it. Not completely, not yet, but enough to breathe. Enough to hope. Months passed, and we settled into our small apartment in Jamaica Plain, a world away from Beacon Hill's polished perfection. The place was cramped, with mismatched furniture and a leaky faucet, but it was ours. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes in a dance. Nolan's toys were scattered across the rug, and Caleb's toolbox sat in the corner, a reminder of the life we were building. I'd started a blog, The Black Sheep's Guide, pouring my heart into words I'd never dared to say out loud. It began as a way to process that night in Beacon Hill. The betrayal, the truth, the way it had cracked me open and set me free. But it grew into something bigger, a space for others like me, people who'd been cast out by their families, told they were less than. My essay, "My Son Was Not a Mistake," went viral, shared by strangers who saw their own pain in my words. Every morning, I'd wake to emails from readers. Mothers, daughters, sons, all carrying their own scars. "Thank you," one wrote. "You made me feel less alone." I'd read those words with my coffee, Nolan babbling in his high chair, and feel a purpose I'd never known, but the scars were still there. One day, a letter arrived from my father, his handwriting as stiff as his suits. Inside was a formal apology, clipped and careful, and a check for Nolan's college fund. It felt like a transaction, not love, a way to buy his way out of guilt. I slid the check into a drawer, unsure if I'd ever cash it. Then came Victoria's email, a single paragraph that cut like a dull knife. "You've always been selfish, Harper. You tore us apart for your own ego." No apology, just blame. I read it once, then deleted it, my hands shaking. But her words lingered, whispering that maybe I had been selfish. Maybe I'd been the one to break us. Caleb found me staring at the laptop, my eyes glassy. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down his wrench. I showed him the email, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if she's right?" He knelt beside me, his hands warm on mine. "She's not. You didn't break them, Harper. They broke themselves, trying to control you." I leaned into him, letting his words sink in. He was right, but the doubt still gnawed at me. I was stronger now, but not unbreakable. Then came the email that changed everything. An invitation to speak at the Westwood Women's Conference, a major event with thousands of attendees. The theme was choosing yourself. My blog had caught their attention, and they wanted me as a keynote speaker. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. This was a chance to tell my story, to reach people face to face. But the fear was immediate, visceral. The voice in my head, my mother's, Victoria's, my own, whispered that I didn't belong on a stage. I was the black sheep, meant to stay in the shadows. Caleb read the email over my shoulder, his grin wide. "You're doing this," he said, like it was already decided. "I don't know if I can," I admitted, my voice small. "You can," he said, his eyes fierce with belief. "You've already done the hard part. You walked away. You built this." He gestured to our apartment, to Nolan, to the laptop glowing with my words. "This is just the next step." I nodded, but the fear didn't fade. It sat in my chest, heavy and cold, as I typed my acceptance. I was stepping into the light, but I wasn't sure I was ready. The Westwood Women's Conference was a sea of faces, a buzzing auditorium filled with women in sharp blazers and bright dresses, their voices a hum of anticipation. I stood backstage, my hands clammy, my heart hammering so loud I was sure the microphone would pick it up. The coordinator, a kind woman with a clipboard and a warm smile, gave me a 5-minute warning. "You've got this, Harper," she said, but her words barely registered. All I could hear was the chorus of doubt in my head. My mother's clipped disapproval. Victoria's sneering, "You'll always be nothing." My own voice, whispering that I didn't belong here, that I'd trip over my words and prove them right. My speech, scribbled on index cards, felt heavy in my pocket, each word a potential landmine. I paced the small backstage area, my heels clicking against the hardwood. The weight of Beacon Hill pressed against me again. The marble steps, the cold dining room, the years of being told I was less than. I'd come so far, but standing here I felt like that scared girl again, the one who'd fled her family's judgment with tears in her eyes. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I glanced at it, expecting Caleb's usual encouragement. But it wasn't him. It was Victoria. A text, short and raw. "I'm sorry for what I said. He's not a mistake. You were never the mistake. I was just afraid." I stared at the words, my breath catching. Victoria, my perfect sister, admitting fear? It was a crack in her armor, a glimpse of the sister I'd once loved before jealousy and tradition had built a wall between us. I didn't know what to feel, anger, relief, or something softer like hope. But her words were a spark, a small flame against the cold doubt in my chest. The coordinator's voice snapped me back. 1 minute, Harper. I closed my eyes, picturing Nolan's gummy smile, Caleb's steady hand in mine. I thought of the readers who'd written to me, strangers who'd found strength in my story. I wasn't just doing this for me, I was doing it for them. For us. The stage lights hit me like a spotlight as I stepped out, the applause a roar that made my knees wobble. I scanned the crowd and found Caleb in the front row, Nolan in his lap, waving a chubby hand. My son's happy gurgle cut through the noise and I smiled, the knot in my chest loosening. I took a breath and began. My name is Harper Thompson, and for most of my life I was told I was a mistake. My voice shook at first, but it grew steadier with every word. I told them everything. The suffocating expectations of Beacon Hill, the family who'd erased me, the night Caleb had laid the truth bare. I spoke of the pain of being the black sheep, the shame that had clung to me like damp clothes, and the slow, hard work of building a life that was mine. The crowd was silent, then alive, nods, tears, soft gasps. I saw women clutching each other's hands, their eyes reflecting my own scars. When I spoke of Nolan, of choosing to love him fiercely despite the world's judgment, a woman in the third row sobbed openly. I felt it then, a connection, a shared strength that filled the room. As I finished, the applause was thunderous, vibrating through me like a heartbeat. I caught a glimpse of a figure at the back of the auditorium, half hidden in the shadows. My mother. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes glistened with something that might have been pride, or regret, or both. She didn't approach, didn't speak, but her presence was enough. A door, not fully open, but cracked. I stepped off the stage, my legs trembling, and Caleb was there, pulling me into his arms. "You were incredible," he whispered, Nolan babbling happily between us. I held them both, my family, and felt the weight of the past lift just a little more. The weeks after the conference were a blur of emails, interviews, and messages from women who'd heard my speech. The Black Sheep's Guide grew, its readership swelling into the thousands. I spent mornings answering comments, evenings writing new posts, each word a step toward healing. Our apartment, once just a place to crash, became a home filled with Nolan's laughter and Caleb's off-key humming as he cooked dinner. As I typed, I glanced out the window at the city lights, bright and alive. My story wasn't over. There would be more doubts, more scars, maybe even more fights with the ghosts of Beacon Hill. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was Harper Thompson, mother, writer, survivor. I'd built a family, a voice, a life. And for the first time, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. The future stretched out before me, not a straight path but a winding one, full of hope and possibility. I closed my laptop, leaned into Caleb's warmth, and let myself believe in it. My journey from Beacon Hill's black sheep to a woman standing in her own light taught me this. Your worth is not defined by those who refuse to see it. Healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means building a life so full and true that their judgment no longer has a place to live. If you're out there feeling like you don't belong, remember that you don't have to win their game. You just have to build your own. Your voice matters, your story is valid, and you are enough, exactly as you are.